Hi everybody, I hope you're doing marvellously well. This is a very, very exciting episode for us. We had the pleasure of going to interview probably one of the greatest producers of all time. This is somebody who made albums by U2, by Emmy Lou Harris, and of course, one of my personal favorites, Mr. Peter Gabriel. We're talking about Daniel Lanois. It's a real blessing because Daniel, as you know, doesn't give a huge amount of interviews. He's, I would say, a very private person, but also probably somebody who works his butt off. He's always working. He is a solo artist himself. He's an incredible songwriter, singer, producer, multi-instrumentalist, and has made some of the best sounding albums of all time. So we felt very lucky when our friends over at Radar contacted us and said, would you like to go and interview Daniel? And of course, we're very excited. So without further ado, let's get into our interview with Mr. Daniel Lanois. Where do you come from first? Are you all about the song? If somebody sends you some stuff to listen to, is it the song, and the song for you?
Yeah. No, it's not always all about the song. There might be a great riff or a groove or a melody or even a title. And I've done some co-writes where, Wayne might have mentioned, I'm doing some songwriting with Michael Nelson. And he sent me a little chord sequence on an acoustic guitar. I processed it and sent it back to him. And he said, it sounds like The Ocean Floor. And I thought, okay, The Ocean Floor, that's a great title. And I wrote a whole song called The Ocean Floor, all the lyrics, and sent that back to him.
Beautiful.
So sometimes a minor component will trigger a whole story, and that will be a direction to take in the studio. It's pretty old school that somebody would have songs ready to go, and then that's a good one, and that's a good one, let's go. I don't think I've ever worked that way.
No, that's great.
We do so much studio composition, so it's...
I think that probably speaks to what we talked about at the beginning, about if somebody's hiring you, they're hiring you because of you as an artist that's a producer as well. It's like kind of a combo platter. They know they're getting a great songwriter, somebody they can really help them take their songs to the next level.
They hire me because they hope to get to a masterpiece. I never know how we're going to do it, but we can certainly give it our best.
I want to know more about your methodology of production, because you come at it, I would assume, you can tell me I'm wrong, please do, as a performer and understanding an artist. You think that gives you a leg up?
I do what I do, which happens to be a musical approach. I'm a musician first. I can get in there and work on arrangements with people, and I have an understanding of harmonies. I'm rhythmic, so I can have a nice communication with drummers, and so that happens to be my approach because of my talent. Other producers may have another way of doing things, but for me, it's a musical approach.
When you worked on your first solo record, or was it your first solo record, but the record you did with Eno, how did that come about?
These two great women called the Time Twins made recordings with me, and they were very adventurous recordings. They then went to New York and met a few folks, and Eno being one of them. And he liked the recording a lot. He said, where'd you make these? And my name came up, and he just called up and booked some time at our studio, my brother and I's studio.
Oh, that's fantastic.
In Canada.
In a very naive way, looking at it from the outside, you two together, you seem so different in your production styles that it actually seems perfect that you would work together because you would bring things together. But that's a naive assumption. I can't say I've been in a room with you working, but is that any truth to that kind of assumption?
Well, I don't know about different approaches. We strive for the same goals, which are just constantly on the lookout for something special. Mm-hmm. So we have that in common. And he's a very inventive man, and so that's what I love about him. And he brings that out in me. And then I can facilitate a direction more quickly because I've got a few tricks up my sleeve musically and technologically.
Talking of technology, how do you feel you've been impacted? I mean, we're obviously talking, with Radar running in the background, recording our vocals, recording our voices. Did you find that a big shift moving from the wonderful world of 2-inch tape into digital?
Well, there are advantages to the digital world. We can make a copy of a multi-track with the push of one button that used to be hours of work transferring from one machine to the next. So I really appreciate that about it. We can move along a little more quickly. I do miss the no inherent delay of analog. So I transfer tracks a lot with processing. There's always a smidgen of delay when that happens. So you have to take that in consideration when reblending to sources. Sometimes if we like the processing that got printed, then we go to the source and do a one generation transfer of that, so that we're now in sync with our processings. So you got to keep that in mind. It's better for punching, that's for sure, because if you screw it up, you can undo.
Right.
But I kind of like the old-fashioned way of doing it. You take a punch, and you better get it right, or you get another job.
Start over again. Yeah. But working in radar, am I right to say you're not treating it like a DAW? You're not sitting there chopping things up. You're thinking of it as a high-quality way of recording in real time.
It's always chopping things up. That's everything we do.
Oh, okay. Yeah, tell me more. I'd love to know.
Building arrangements. And,
right.
In an old school way, you might have a half a dozen takes of a given song, and the intro might be great on the first, and the bulk of it would be best on the third, and the outro on the last take, for example, something like that. And we just put all that together. Editing never stops. It's a big part of what we do.
But I obviously get the feeling from your records, you're not going in there individually editing drums. You're finding whole grooves and feels and preserving that in the same way you would tape.
We go after a take that will have the magic intact. And if there's a few slippery bars, then we have a technique, Wayne and I have a technique where we let's say we have 2 golden bars, then we have a way, as long as it was cut to metronomic time, we have a way of placing that into the problem zone. So, I might not do one beat at a time, but we've been known to do 1 bar at a time, no problem.
Right. But I suppose in a way, maybe you were doing on tape, but a heck of a lot quicker now.
A lot quicker. Yeah. I can remember doing chalk marks on a multi-track tape to spin it back into another, but that's all behind us now.
Right. How long have you been on radar?
90s, late 90s. Yeah, quite a long time on radar. I got introduced to the system in Ireland when we were working on a U2 record. And I thought it was quite a good system. I never questioned it. And I've stuck with it all this time. Radar have been very kind to us, with servicing, and even on weekends, they'll take our calls and if we have any problems. So we continue to work with them. We're always excited about their latest equipment.
You remember back in the days with Barry, though, obviously.
I remember back in the day with Barry, of course, yeah. Because we were pretty much there at the beginning of his inventions, yeah. But we've been at the forefront of an awful lot. We were the first studio in Canada to use Bryston power amplifiers. And that's become pretty much a world standard, for those kind of heavy amps. They're really great sounding, and they don't make a bunch of noise because they don't have any fans. Yeah, we try and stay loyal to things, equipment that serves us well, and people who are helpful to us as well. So, yeah. And
I presume the longer you have it, the more you learn it, the best, rather than changing something quickly, you actually get a better understanding of your equipment.
Or a better understanding of people as well, So if you don't have to start a brand new relationship, then I think that's better. We're fine with radar, and those people are always helpful to us. And Paul was here recently he moved to Palm Springs because he's expecting a baby, him and his wife. So he stopped. It was nice to see the both of them, and we'd seen them in New Orleans before, and Nashville, and all over the place. So it's nice to maintain a relationship with people that they admire, and that just keeps building. The friendship keeps building, and it's nice.
Yeah, it's wonderful.
Should never go out of fashion. What's interesting about it all is you can never quite know what equipment sounds like until you go back and listen to your work. So I've listened to mixes that were done from 2-inch through my Neve console, And those multi-tracks have been transferred to radar, and I'm using a different console, and I notice a difference in sound. Sometimes it's hard to beat the punch and the musicality of what I used to use back in the day. But, that's a long time ago, and I don't think anybody cares that much about what equipment we use. They just want to hear good records. I don't know. I'm beyond making comparisons of
Sure.
what I used to do and what I'm doing now. We just hope to make records that reach people.
Right.
And, we just happen to be using the radar system now. I just don't like changing things,
Right.
I like to get on with work and
Yeah. No, I relate.
stick with something for a while.
Yeah.
The punchiness really, I think, comes from the approach more so than the recorder. I guess what happens is the equipment will dictate a certain approach and pace, and then we apply our talents to what we have at hand by people in the room and by instruments and by consoles. After all this time, where I'm still down to just 2 or 3 processing devices. In a dream state, I might think that, if I had 20 different effects, and the options would lead me to, a greater palette of colors and so on. But I don't think that's true. I still just use 2 or 3 effects, and we just work with those. But the thing that has never changed is we print as we go along. So if we bump into something interesting with a spin echo, for example, or some kind of a feedback system that from one effect to the next and then back to the first and so on to a third. These are very touchy parameters. We just print something. If it feels really special at the time, then it's never lost. And so that's the technique I was using with Brian Eno for the ambient records, and I still use that technique today.
Yeah, those beautiful records. Beautiful. What are those effects? What are the 2 or 3 that you always go back to?
I use an AMS harmonizer, same model that we've been using since the 80s, 70s, I think. I've got a 3500 Eventide, and I still use an old Lexicon Primetime. So that's it.
Those are great. I have 2 of those. I don't have a prime time, though. I was quite envious of that.
Oh, you have 2 of those AMSs?
No, I have 2 of the 3 effects, but I don't have a prime time.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, let me know if you're getting rid of your AMS. I'm looking for a good one.
I'm going to hang on to it more now, knowing that you use it. And I see a pair of old Neves here.
Yeah, I've been using this technique for a long time. After the console, we hit, in this case, 2 Pultec equalizers that then hit the Neve compressors. The Neve compressors that we have there are from the Melbourne series, the sort of the narrower modules. And that's the final output to the ultimate 2-track recording. And the way we do it is we mix internally back onto the radar on tracks 23 and 24. So that's it. That's a nice touch. You can think of it as a little bit of mastering as you're going along. We may put mixes back through all that before going to mastering. There's a technique that I like to use, which is if you've got your mixes done, then try and improve them in-house before they go to mastering. It's something that I did on an Emmy Lou Harris record called Wrecking Ball. We had the record mastered, and it sounded a little bit flat. And I thought, well, that might be too much pressure to put on a mastering engineer. Why don't we bump it up ourselves and see how we do? And that technique worked really well. So it gave the mastering engineer other things to do rather than try and equalize and compress and touch it up. And besides, we have a nice assortment of that kind of gear in-house anyhow, be it API, EQs, or this and that and the other thing. So that's something that Wayne and I put quite a bit of time into. We might kind of bump up the fidelity as we see fit.
It sounds like to me, in an ideal situation, it's you and Wayne making and finishing the record from start to finish. It's very popular to have superstar mixers mix everybody's stuff.
Oh, okay. We keep the superstars in-house.
Good.
Well, hey, man, you never know when you're going to get a good mix. Even those rough and ready along the way mixes are oftentimes some of the greats. I've had trouble bettering early vibe mixes, when I made Bob Dylan's Time Out of Mind record, we worked on a Neve in Miami, a Neve 8078, a 4-band EQ. But back in California, my studio was in Oxnard at the time. We had an 8068, and so and we had really great rough mixes out of Miami from Criteria, and so it was quite an undertaking to match what we had out of Miami, but I eventually got there. And so those roughies will often provide quite a bit of information, because rough mixes are done at a time when you have knowledge of your ingredients, you're excited about what you have, and oftentimes those will have the spunk in them, and let them be a guide to what you're going to do ultimately.
These days, 99% of the time, you're completing the project from start to finish. You're mixing and everything.
Yeah. I never. I can't remember ever people doing external mixes, other than when I worked with U2. We had Flood with us, who's a great mixer, and we had 2 rooms going. So Flood would be doing some mixes in one room, and me and the Edge in another room, that sort of thing.
But that's almost like because you're doing it as a team, and
as a team,
yeah.
It's good to work as a team. I think the best work I've done has been involving the team effort. All the background vocals done internally. This Eno, Edge, and myself did most of the background vocals on the U2 records, for example. And so, there might be some better singers down the road, but I believe that people feel the presence of that kind of commitment. So the house sound, house commitment. I've never really fully bought into the idea that you're going to send your multi-track somewhere and somebody else is going to mix them. I mean, if it works out, terrific, but it's not what I depend on.
Kind of a silly, fanish question. And I'm sure you get asked the version of this. Of all the albums that you've done, what is the one that you still like? You listen to and you're like,
you're asking me to choose my favorite child.
I sort of am. Yeah.
Gonna make somebody mad. When enough time has gone by and on an off chance, I get to hear my work from back in the day, let's say maybe in a shop or somebody's house, it's then that I have a better understanding of what it's all about. I've enjoyed the Achtung Baby U2 record because it's a great rock and roll record, but with very inventive and unusual tops, melodies, and harmonies, and so on. So that one is dear to me. I like the Dylan records I made. There's a real smokiness to the first one that we made together. It's called Oh Mercy. And it's got that real nighttime New Orleans sound. And maybe it's best to talk about how flavors were captured and how we got there, and whether we were able to, snap the camera just at the right time of performance. I mean, they're called records for a reason. You're making a record of something that exists at a certain time, and we can never go back and be those people again. So that's the responsibility, that we want to capture the magic, do something special. It belongs to that time. We thank our lucky stars and then move on. But a decade later, can't go back to that. So the records that I love are the ones that are a proper representation of the people at that time in that place, and let them live on. And they're never dated. There might be a naive spirit that shines through, but that's good. I mean, you can't say, let's go in and be naive, can you?
No.
You're going to do the best you can, and then maybe a decade later you think, boy, we're just flying by the seat of our pants. We did the best we could with what we had, and there's a bit of a naive flavor.
Did you end up working with Peter Gabriel through Eno, or was that came from yourself? How did that all come together?
I got to work with Peter Gabriel on the recommendation of David Rhodes, and David is a guitar player with Peter,
Fantastic.
A great musician and really a brilliant mind, and somebody who keeps an ear to the ground. And he suggested, because I went to work with Peter to do a soundtrack for a film called Birdie, and David, I believe, said, consider this kid because he's been doing some very inventive work, sonically out there. And David had heard my work with Eno.
As a fan of music yourself, are you ever overwhelmed by it sometimes? You're sitting in a room with Bob Dylan for the first time?
I guess you got to get over that pretty quickly,
Absolutely.
I mean, somebody like Bob Dylan has done so much and is a fantastic songwriter and very resourceful person. But I believe that somebody on his level would be looking for someone who would be a talent equal to his, but in a different place. And so I make an effort to find out what's making somebody tick at a given time, and there might be some hidden emotions in them that they don't know about. And that's part of my job to promote the very best, and for those hidden treasures to come to the surface somehow. So it's all very psychological stuff that doesn't have much to do with gear. But the thing that I've noticed is people really respond to commitment. So if I'm producing a record for someone, I'm not on the phone or thinking about the next gig or anything like that. They get all of me, and I think that kind of commitment it creates a snowball effect. It's quite contagious. They know that I'm there for the right reasons.
And that's a big deal in the modern age with all of these things that we've got.
Well, it can be a little distractive if people are on the phone. I mean, I don't want to make small of technology. Sometimes I'm using my phone as my dictaphone now, and it saves everything, and I've learned to work with it, so it's a good tool that way. Sometimes people have lyrics on a laptop, and that's fine. But making holiday plans on on your computer,
buying a yacht,
might not add up to much in regards to getting things done in the studio.
You're known for working in, I suppose, unconventional circumstances. Like you'll just create a studio, obviously famously, what was the castle? Slane Castle?
Slane Castle.
Yeah, Slane Castle. I mean, hey, let's make a record here. I mean, is that a challenge? Do you like the challenge, or is it something about the atmosphere that excites you?
I like conventional studios. I like places that have half a dozen rooms and there's somebody down the hall making a record and somebody around the corner, and let's go to Studio D and see what's happening in there. And I've enjoyed that at the Power Station in New York, for example, or the Village here in Los Angeles. And so, just to have a hive of action under one roof can be nice. But what's nice about setting up a studio specific to the project at hand is, again, I'll say the word commitment. So you build the studio specifically for those people for that record, and I think there's a sense of that provides a lot of encouragement, and it's like, okay, everybody's working hard for the same goal here, and so. But we make records in all kind of places. This particular, it's not a very glamorous room that we're in, but it's got enough stuff in it that it's quite dead sounding, and Wayne hung a futon up there just so that I don't get too much echo behind the speakers. But I record a lot of dead sounds these days. It's not so crash bang anymore. I prefer, I've got my Duco drum kit there with tea towels on it, and that's a very nice sound. And so I don't like room sounds that much anymore. Those kind of ideas were pretty popular in the 70s and the 80s. The studio would have a stone room, and that's okay. I'd rather not record drums in a stone room. Why? I'd rather pat them down and
you're in a room with the musicians.
Yeah, we just do everything together. Although this setup down here has a lot of side rooms, so you can put a guitar amplifier in another corner, but we try and keep all the people together. Proximity is a friend to communication, and so it stops that. Okay, everybody come in and listen to it, and then they listen to it and say, "Oh, it sounded better in the cans," or it stops that division, so everybody hears the same thing all the time. We wear headphones in a setting like this. I don't turn on the speakers if we're doing some singing or even drums. But for a playback, it's like take off the phones and we just turn on the speakers. I use a very simple system, be a blend for a monitoring blend for recording, then another monitoring blend for playback. So 2 levels. We're recording. The faders are all marked in the A position. Let's do a playback. Let's bring up the drums, this and that and the other thing. So you have two monitor settings, let's say. Yeah. And that works out pretty good. And we don't build a special mix for the drummer wouldn't be hearing a different mix than the piano player and so on. We try and keep everybody happy. Sometimes I might feed a little extra time reference to the drummer if that's the way we're working. But otherwise, we keep it musical, and that way everybody hears the same mix all the time.
And you find that allows them to interact better?
I think the blend is very important. And, you could use there's a stage analogy to be brought into light. And I picked this up from Neil Young. He doesn't use close monitors. He uses side fills because he doesn't want his voice to be coming out so close to him out of a speaker at his feet. So he prefers to hear something that's a little closer to what the audience hears. And I think that creates a certain kind of projection. I think it's the same in the studio. If you have a certain kind of balance, then people will respond to that balance and play in a certain way. So it's never the same thing twice, of course. If it's a nighttime feeling thing with a spin echo that relates to a tempo, if we're working at a fixed tempo, then that can be a nice thing to have in the cans because it juices people up and maybe it makes things sound a little more Jamaican or a little this way or that way. But we customize our blends according to what we're doing, of course.
Would that similarly affect how you use compression?
I stopped using compression going to the recorder. Although when I recorded, I did some nice demos with Robert Plant. I love working with him, and he wanted to have some compression on his mic, and to juice it up a little bit, so that he didn't have to wait until after the fact to hear the excitement. So he's a great singer and really responds to that kind of sound. So we plugged in, a nice LA2A and had an equalizer hit the LA2A. So it has a little more, it was an exciting sound, a little more like a stage sound, which he responded to. Sometimes we'll do an insert, if something's a little too erratic, when we'll plug in a compressor, just, have it be that the bass drum's not cream in the cans,
Right.
But we don't use a lot of compression these days to tape. I might get back into it now that I'm talking about it. More compressors. Yeah, we're not using compressors much these days, although in the mix, the Neve compressors are always active, and maybe it's best for us to wait for the when we're laying down a mix. But I still like it. In certain situations, you might create a little bit of excitement. If Robert Plant comes back in, I'll make sure I plug in the compressor.
As you intimated, you've had studios everywhere. When I first moved to America, mid-90s, I think, were you in New Orleans then?
Yeah, mid-90s. I was in New Orleans, yeah.
So I think I remember walking down the street and everybody's like, Daniel Lanois studios in there.
Oh, yeah. Well, that was
mythical.
That was a fabulous place, a beautiful old mansion in the French Quarter. Massive place, had 2 studios, one in the main ground floor area, and then we had a Studio B upstairs in the back. We had a nice API console that I bought from the record plant out of New York when they closed down. A beautiful, fantastic battleship of an API with graphic EQs all the way across, but mounted in the meter bridge position. So a console like this, you have to hunch over and look to see what's going on with the equalizer. You practically need a microscope. But this API, you could see, because they were graphics, even from sitting in the back of the room, you could see what was going on equalization-wise for a given channel. It was a bit of a stroke of genius, the design of that thing. But I sold it to John Frusciante from the Chili Peppers. I had too many.
Yeah, I think, Wayne, how many BCM 10s are in here? 4? Yeah.
Yeah, and then we got a bunch more of that stuff up in Toronto. And Toronto is more Melbourne series ones. We have some Kelsos as well. And we ran an interesting experiment comparing mic preamps some time back and the preamp equalizer. And at the time, the Kelso came out front, and all it has is a bass and a treble. I think they're fixed frequencies. And I remember thinking, well, that sounds better than the rest. So it's the cheapest one.
That's incredible.
Sometimes fewer electronics, just give you clarity and signal path. My first console was a homemade console, and each channel had one integrated circuit. That was it. You look inside these things, you see dozens of ICs. But there was something nice about the clarity of that homemade console. And then I moved into an MCI console, and that was meant to be much better, but it was hissy by comparison. So there's something to be said about simple circuitry.
Was the MCI with the studio you had with your brother?
Yeah, the MCI was a studio I had with my brother Bob. It was an MCI 500, and it was the same model that Eno had already been working on in New York.
I was wondering about the connection on that, yeah.
And when he came in, he says, oh yeah, this is one of my favorite consoles, because he had done Remain in Light for the Talking Heads on the same model. And they had the MCI had, I think it was 8 groupers, so you could assign individual channels to a grouper, and then you could just kind of mute them down or put them in. So the Remain in Light record has a lot of, a whole section will be, you might get dun 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 dun. So the radical changes were happening by switching groups.
Oh, fantastic!
So it was a way of getting a wild scene change, because it would be hard to pull that off, in a mix with open faders. So the little grouping system was a friend of that record, and he's a very, very innovative man. So he did some beautiful work that's one of my favorite records. This will also do that, but we haven't been using that function so much.
I'm good friends with Dave Jordan. So he told me that the MCI was, loved that particular console.
Yeah, and I found the same. They had the same MCI 500 at Tough Gong when I worked there, and with Jimmy Cliff in Kingston.
Oh, fantastic! How was that? That's a whole.
Oh,
that's a whole conversation I haven't heard before.
One of the greatest maraca players I've ever encountered. Because I play maracas, but I'm more. But he was the ornaments and the embellishments were out of this world. And I thought, and we talked about that the other day, how in Jamaica, calypso came before ska and reggae as we know it. So there's a long, and consequently, we don't allow egg shakers in the studio. We just use those Jamaican shakers because they're the best ones.
See, I knew I liked him. I pathologically hate egg shakers. Is there nothing worse on a track than him? It's like an ice pick through the head.
Well,
I don't understand why that frequency needs to be there.
Well, in the hands of Jimmy Cliff, you'd probably like it.
Yeah. Oh, this is true. This is true. That would have been an incredible experience. How did that record come about?
There were demos that I did. I was working with Chris Blackwell at the time, and he asked me to go in and help out Jimmy, and I did. And I lost track of what happened with those recordings, so just we'll have to ask Chris Blackwell if he's still sitting on them.
And I presume Chris Blackwell through Island, through U2. Did you meet that way?
I met Chris Blackwell through U2. That's right, because their records were on Island Records at the time. And Island Records had a very vibrant office in New York. Upstairs from Tower Records, they had the whole top floor. And I just loved Chris because he's the opposite of me. He's not a musician, but he puts all of his energy in looking at the broader picture of a record and not so much the specifics. He might say, well, you've already got that song covered with this one. You should have another fast song or another this or that. So he's more of a record man than I am. You know, I'm a studio dog.
He always feels, from the outside at least, like a bit of a visionary, that he signs artists, he sticks with them for the longest period and keeps going until they become successful.
Well, I asked him how he did it, you know, and it was obviously a different pace, different times. We talked about Cat Stevens, and he says the first Cat Stevens record cost very little, and it was vibrant and full of ideas, and it was a really great record. And then second one cost more, and maybe it was less successful. And then the money, the budgets kept getting bigger and bigger, and the success rate was a little smaller. So you never know how you're going to get them. But I just love that he always talked about how something might catch on, or that really caught on. So to be on the pulse of something that would resonate with culture at a given time, he was very good at that. And he started out bringing Jamaican music to England and just selling those records. He had some little scooter he used to sell them in a box on the back of a scooter. Because there was a Jamaican population in London that he was hoping to cater to. And then it just exploded from there. Do you know what his first single was? Minnie Small singing My Boy Lollipop.
My Boy Lollipop.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And a great record to this day, you know.
Incredible.
Snapshot in time for sure.
I think his resume, without getting too off onto a tangent, it's pretty incredibly comprehensive, because Ireland had the best blues rock as well, mixed in with ska, and then with U2. I mean,
I think it's just called good taste.
Good taste. I think you're right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, Fire and Water is such a masterpiece of simplicity. What a great record. Have that and Bob Marley on the same roster. I mean, I want to touch back on the houses, though, because every single one of these places, we're talking about this place here, New Orleans, castles. I mean, there's got to be something in there you're fascinated with, like finding a unique building that adds to the whole process.
Well, some of it is bringing the equipment to where the music lives. And if I have my story right, I believe some of the Talking Heads recordings were done that way, that Brian brought a truck into their rehearsal room because they already sounded good. And I borrowed this idea when I was working in New York with a group called Luscious Jackson, and they had a nice little rehearsal spot at Kate Schellenbach's house on 14th Street. And they sounded really good. They were already set up. And I said, well, listen, don't move anything. We'll just bring the equipment to you. And we started the record there, and that turned out to be great. I worked with a great guy named Tony Mangurian. We had a lot of fun, and we didn't ask them to change anything about what they were doing. We just brought everything to them. My brother Bob helped me with that. And so sometimes there's a practical reason to do it. In the case of Slane Castle, that was Bono's idea. He wanted to be making a record in a place that had a lot of history in its bones, and that's particularly significant because the Battle of the Boyne was fought at the bottom of the hill from Slane Castle. So we were just a couple of 100 yards away from the defining battle that where England took Ireland, and we ran our studio on river power. It was a turbine.
That's incredible.
This is long before computers. Sometimes we'd be down to 90 volts. It's okay. The tape recorder is still running at 90 volts. You know?
I suppose it's also their Headley Grange as well. Their kind of moment, for Zeppelin with their recording in castles and mansions and stuff like that.
Yeah, it's a way of keeping things exciting, Yeah. We went to Berlin to work at Hansa Studios.
Oh, tell me about that. We went to Hansa about 3 years ago and had Absolutely fantastic time. And was that a Bowie thing? Was that like thinking of heroes, or
Well,
how did that come about?
I believe the fellas wanted to make a European rock record, and they thought, maybe to be in that place where Eno had been with Iggy Pop and Bowie, and Eno was with us for the making of that record, co-producer, and then Flood was in there. So we were very excited to be in that monumental place where so much great music had been made. Well, you've been there. The main room is a big orchestra room.
Huge, yeah. Massive ceiling.
And with the control room down the hall. So we did something very smart. We didn't ask the control room people to provide us with blends for our headphones and our PA. We had Joe O'Hurley, who does sound for them live, do sound for us in the orchestra room. So that took the pressure off of the control room people. They could concentrate on the recording of it all. And then we would speak to Joe about our blends for monitoring purposes. And that turned out to be a great idea. And we had it set up pretty much like a live performance. We had a PA and stage monitors. And I mean, we went to Cannes if we had to. But the idea was that we would try and harness that thing that they do very well. We found a sweet little sonar drum kit in the closet, and Larry brought all his touring equipment. He had a very nice Yamaha drum kit, and let's not tell Yamaha, but we used a sonar kit for the bulk of the drums on Octane Baby. You never know about drums because, like, I have this little Duco here, and that's just that's a vintage kit that I got from Pro Drum here in LA. Came with a matching snare, and it was $1,200. And it was considered a bit of a student kit at the time because the two heads share one lug, and the more expensive kits will have two lug mountings. And so there's something to be said for less hardware. And maybe the drums resonate a little better for that reason. I'm not sure, but there it is. I have all kind of 4 or 5 drum kits here, and I have a nice round badge Gretsch from the late '50s. Last time Brian Blade was in here, we put him on the Gretsch, and gradually he look over the gobo, and it all turned into the Duco kit eventually because it just had a little bit deeper sound.
Pro Drum what a wonderful shop that is. I'm giving those guys a shout out.
Yeah, it's a lovely store. And then Stein on Vine are next door, and they do all the cellos and upright basses and violins. The 2 really great stores, and it'll be a sad day when they disappear.
I hope they don't. Yeah, it's started by the brothers' grandparents, wasn't it?
I believe so.
And professional drummers,
sweet people, and it's nice to be in a place that's owner operated. You get that little extra care, and I think people feel that with record making as well. If it's owner operated, as this is, and these are all handpicked pieces, and we maintain them. Maintain our pianos as we talked about, but to choose the right drums, I've got a nice snare drum there, a Black Beauty that from the '20s, I think, that Brian Blade chose for me. It's a beautiful snare, and instant respect from drummers that come in, Black Beauty, okay. And then handpicked cymbals, we have I've been collecting cymbals all my life, so the ones that I managed to hang on to are dear to me. The old hi-hat cymbals have a certain kind of silkiness to them. And it's the same with microphones. We have nice ribbon mics, those Sony C37As that we talked about early on. I just took a chance on a pair of those because they were refurbishing Massey Hall in Toronto back in the day, and they were getting rid of that stuff. I said, okay, I'll take them. And they turned out to be really great mics that you can get a little closer to them than a Neumann, let's say. The Neumanns are terrific, but you get too close, sometimes the capsule will collapse.
I know, unfortunately, you lost your brother last year. Did you Were you working together on and off through all the years? You've had lots of opportunities since starting that studio together?
Yeah, I worked with my brother, especially the early years. We were very, very close, and we built, we brainstormed together and built studios. We never worked in a formal studio. I never knew much about it. We just kind of learned through our own means and, and a trial and error. And we did something that I thought was, in retrospect, was a clever thing to do. We took an interest in building house sound, I call it, and make sure that we had the best instruments and microphones, but things all set up all the time. We didn't tear down at the end of the day. And so people could walk in and try out our bass rig and say, okay, well, I'll use this because it sounds wonderful and it's all ready to go. And same thing with the drums, nailed the drums to the floor, and that was the house kit and so on. So I was never at Motown in Detroit, but I had heard that that's how they did it. And it's not how it was done in the Toronto area at the time. So we adapted that approach of having house sound. And then when I started working with Eno, he used a technique whereby his effects were floated to a couple of tracks into the multi-track. So the effects were not just listened to in the mix, but they were ready to be printed on 2 tracks. So, and if things were really happening effect-wise, just going to record. And then you could take those bits of processing back to the chain again and just keep printing and printing. So that was a nice addition to an already existing philosophy. When I worked with Eno, I thought, well, don't wait. If you've got something special, print it.
What mistake that you made do you think you learned the most from?
I should have done a PIL record that I said no to. That was a mistake.
Yeah?
Well, it would have been a chance to work with John Wobble and Johnny Lydon. And I should have done that record, and I didn't. So that's a mistake. I should have done Sinead O'Connor's first record, and then I said no to that. I was tired, and I wanted to get out of Dublin. So I said, nah, I don't think so. But that would have been... she's such a great singer. I've worked with Sinead plenty otherwise, but so that was a mistake.
You feel like now you're more open to working with different artists? What was the sort of...
I'm less cautious than I used to be. Well, what happens if you get thrown in a room with people, then let the show begin, So sometimes it's better not to overthink things too much. I mean, we're reminded about that every day, that we come down here with a certain thought in mind, and then hours later, something completely different will have happened. And it's just a reminder one more time that, you might think you know it all, but you don't. The unknown is as mysterious as it ever was. So it's nice to be humbled by those kind of results, where oh geez, I hadn't thought about that, and then we got to a special place that I didn't anticipate. But that's a real, I don't know if you could reduce it to a technique, but he certainly along the way will find an angle or an approach that will be a surprise to the room, and that may be the very thing that allows us to get to something really unusual and special.
Actually, I hadn't come armed with a story, but you're reminding me. What's the song? The Eno threatening to... Because he said the song had been worked on too much and it would be better to go and retrack it from scratch. Actually, I didn't come armed with that, but I do remember hearing it over the years.
I think that has been
blown out of
the mythology might be actually bigger than the... He just got fed up working on beating up this one track, and he instructed the assistant engineer to just erase the multi-track, which he didn't do. He just hit it for a while. But I think what he was getting at, beyond the specifics of that story, is sometimes laboring over something too long will just provide fatigue rather than results. So it's sometimes better to just start from scratch. Painters do that all the time. Too much paint, just scrape it and bring the canvas down to a blank and start again. We've had nice surprises in the studio. I reference the making of that nice U2 single called Beautiful Day. We were bashing that around in the band room for a good few days. And then one morning, Eno and I came in early, and he came up with this little beatbox. It was quite sounded like Khan from Germany or something like that. And the fellows walked in and said, "What's this?" So, well, that's your song. So they strapped on the instruments and off we went. So sometimes a little an adjustment, a slightly different guide will take you to a very different place.
I like your little reference to Khan.
Yeah, well, the Khan sticking to one beat for a really long time with little changes along the way, almost the way that you're traveling in on one of those lonesome highways where nothing much changes about the road, but then you start noticing, different foliage, and there's a bit of an animal and another bend in the road. So by remaining constant with your center and allowing the flourishings be the scene changes rather than changing the beat. And there have been some good hits that way, popular songs that have, some Sly and the Family Stone songs, Everyday People, for example, is a one chord song. So it's, somebody then say, "Hey, let's try a bunch of different chords." No, they just stuck to the one thing. And it's the mantra of that the non-changing part of it that is its friend. The Bob Dylan "Time Out of Mind" record has a bit of that, long songs that nothing much changes. You don't suddenly have a riff jumping out of the bushes. It's just a very, very slow journey through a familiar paysage, and then things start unfolding a little bit as the sun starts coming up. And so those changes are changes that humans respond to because we experience them in nature. So to try and bring that nature tone into a record can be a very nice thing, can be very organic and welcoming.
I love that sort of krautrock period, as people like to call it, with Lanois and bands like that, and so influential on British music, as I'm sure you know. I mean, all the Joy Division kind of period, all of that was so heavily influenced by, and the Bowie records, of course, that did. Do you think Hansa going there was to recapture some of that energy? Because it wasn't that far off of East Germany. And
I think we just wanted to get out of Dublin for one thing and be in a place where we could concentrate on our work. And there was a romantic notion about Hansa at the time because the wall had just come down. Mm-hmm. And I think it was a good choice. I really liked it over there. Choice. I think it was a winter time, so it wasn't very nice to be outside. So we got that out of the way. Just you're either in the studio or in a limo. That's it. Certain things never change, I don't know if the camera can see my steel guitar, but this is the same steel guitar I've had since I was a kid, and I'm not really looking to get a snazzy new one. I appreciate that it's my old friend, and I know it inside out. And so when you think of your basic tools, including the vocal cords and the poetic mind that somebody might have, how they're looking at life at a given time, all of that stuff defies technology, really. We love technology, and we're always interested in what's available to us, but I don't like to be changing it all the time. As I said earlier, I'd like to make knock out a bunch of albums with the tools that I have, and then maybe move on to something else if need be. But some of the things I still enjoy my DX7 sounds that some of those Brian Eno built a long time ago, and and he was very kind to let me have them. And he put a lot of time into them, and it shows, the harmonic tones that come off of his sounds are really special. So just pressing a one note will create a very special feeling. And so let's think of those as an extension of house sound. We have a few things that belong to us that we own. I don't mean we paid for them. I mean we own them because we built them and we grew with them. And we still love them to this day. As we're listening to our final mixes through Pultic equalizers that were built in the 50s, because there's something about that a kind of a musicality that comes from that piece of equipment.
Speaking of which, we've got big. Wayne was telling me these big EV old hanging monitors.
Yeah. Those were in Studio B around the corner, but
Yeah.
I blew out my other ones, and so Wayne brought these over. We're going to move into some other speakers now. We got some other ones coming. So,
what do you got coming?
We got Barefoot's coming, Barefoot, and then Meyer Sound are providing me with some nice mid-sized studio monitors. I forget the model. They're really good. We tried those in Canada. So I said to Wayne, why don't we set the PA back up? I have an old Axis PA because when I'm doing bass overdubs, you got to get the room shaking a little bit and juice up the bass player.
Yeah.
And so, and besides, that's how I damaged my speakers. The bass player just creamed them, and that was it. We blew out a tweeter.
But you've got a little pair of $300 JBLs there as well.
Yeah. Well, I have to remind myself that, that Peter Gabriel So album that people think sounds so great, we mixed that on a pair of Radio Shack copies of Bronze. And then I had strapped some Oratones like that, just jumping the wires from the company. And I'm just kind of bungeed them together and that's how we mixed that record. Because the Braun copies, they were like a Little David copies. I don't know if that's just a model of Braun, Little David, I think they were called. This was a Radio Shack mimic of it. But otherwise, we had, that's how I was introduced to those Tannoy Golds. That's what you were talking about, eh?
We were talking about that earlier,
yeah. And I still use those in Toronto. It's a 1-point source, a coaxial, and there's something nice about that because you can have them close to you, and you don't get the fatigue of yours of the sound coming from different points in the speaker cabinet. But I always say I'll make a record on any speaker that's not broken. You never know. I worked with a fellow great record maker back in the day, Jack Nietzsche, and he said to me, "You know what I like about your studio? Your monitors are completely." He says, "And I like weird monitors because I come up with more unusual results."
Oh, wow. Yeah.
We had a pair of old 604Es, Alltech Lansing, that were in the wrong boxes and everything was wrong. And he spotted that pretty quickly. He says, "That's what I like, really screwed up monitors." One of the best mixers out of Toronto is a guy who works at CBC and is completely deaf in one ear. He mixes this. And he does beautiful work. So I think taste is... Could we diplomatically say that taste has a lot to do with it, with the outcome of a record?
Has a lot to do with it, yeah. Do you ever listen to something now and go, "Oh, I wish I'd done it differently"?
I listened to records I did back in the day, and I recognized that I was excited about a certain approach at that time, and I'm glad that we got to some kind of a result with that excitement. Would I do records differently now? Probably, but I don't have any regrets about something having a little bit of a stamp on it from how we were thinking at that time. It brings us back to what we said earlier, that we appreciate that records have something about them that's unique to that time. Maybe somebody might say, "Oh, we don't do things that way anymore," but there would be a charm that comes with that kind of commitment and believing what we were believing at the time, and so I don't think I want to change too much. Some people have remixed things of mine that I didn't think the mixes were that good, so I want to change those back to the mixes I made.
I understand.
Not going to mention any names.
And a similar tack, what do you think artists who've worked with you, how do you think they'd characterize you?
People making records, they look to have a friend who cares about them and ultimately will help make decisions that are the correct ones to the body of work. I made a record with Neil Young here some years back, very nice record, and we recorded, I think, 16 songs, 17 songs, and we whittled that down to the 10 that I felt were the best ones for that body of work. And Neil was interested in my opinion. So okay, I see what you mean, Dan. There were a couple that these might be better on another record. So let's go after the ones that resonate with what we're doing right now. And so I suppose it would be in the book world, and an editor would say, well, you've it might be a reiteration of a point you made earlier, so let's move on with something else. And so we are editors not only by song editing, but by content.
So do you feel like to each artist you work with, you represent probably shared identities, but they all look for different things maybe that they don't have in themselves or they want to be reinforced in you?
I think what I've seen happen in the studio is we accommodate personalities, and it may not be talked about, but we recognize that somebody has a certain strength, and we want to make sure that that strength makes its way to the finish line. And I wouldn't be pushy and tell people what to do. We go after any idea that anybody has, and then we line up at the end of a week or at the end of a couple of weeks, we line everything up, and it's usually clear to everybody which moments are the outstanding ones and which approaches are best. But if somebody says, I got an idea, can we try it faster or this way? And we always say, yes, let's do it. And if it doesn't come to fruit, that's okay. Let the results decide. That's it, yeah.
Right. So it seems to me, I think going back to what we talked about at the beginning, because you have multiple strengths, because starting off as an artist and then obviously having a studio with your brother and you're developing all these skills, every time you work with an artist, you're bringing different strengths that you have to fit that jigsaw puzzle with them. So I was going to ask you earlier about, what's the ideal length of making a record? But I realize it's a redundant question because there's probably some people that come in and I'm assuming you think, I just want to throw up some mics and capture this. And then there's other times I assume you want to pull things apart and spend longer on it.
Well, we micro-negotiate as human beings do, and, we never really go into a record with by dictating, and here's how it's going to be done. But to repeat what was said earlier, we provide beautiful sounds, we'll have a bass sound set up and a steel and a piano and this and that. So there's already a nice palette of colors to pick from on entering. That's what happened with Neil Young. He brought his own acoustic guitar, and he never took it out of the case because I presented him with my little Guild, a beautiful little mahogany Guild, and we had a great sound on it. And he picked it up and said, oh, this is fantastic. Never heard this before. And so we went ahead and used the Guild, for example. And if we had not had that setup to present to him, then things would have taken a different direction. Is it the Boy Scouts tell you always be prepared? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So I was never in the Scouts, but I heard they said something about it. Well, the thing that should be talked about is
Please.
What lives beyond technology. Because technology is easy to talk about because, there are specific models and that's a lovely console and the compressors and everything we talk. Oh yeah, that's how you do it. But none of that has anything to do with who we are as people. And so, we operate by, we have certain quests, we're always heading to, we like to get to a place where we have touched on innovation, and we brought something to that record that had never been heard before. And that's hard to do. I like to use Time Out of Mind, Bob Dylan, as an example of a record that might have been a little more conventional in spine if we'd followed the footsteps of a blues record, because it's a blues-based record. And so I had to make sure that we flew over the cuckoo's nest of conventional blues, that we got to a place where things were more intriguing, and they might have a bit of a blues tapestry in there somewhere, but the lyrics were forward moving, and the sounds had to be that as well. And I did something with my friend Tony Mangorian in New York. I prepared rhythm tracks that we could use in the studio with Bob should things get a little too regular. And so I knew there would be some shuffles, so Tony and I built a few shuffles, like maybe an 8-bar loop that repeats over and over again. So let's consider that our reference for metronomic time, but it's not a click. It's something that has a nice feeling to it already, as it's already dripping in vibe. And I fed that to the drummers, they being Brian Blade and Jim Keltner. And I'd had a vary speed on the 2 tracks, so just to fine-tune the tempos that it related to the tempo of the song at hand that Bob was delivering. Bob never heard those in his ears, but the drummers did, for example. So a little technique like that, which is just to add to the preparation part of things. It's not just a nice sound on an instrument. That's a good thing to have. But if you've got something up your sleeve that will sidestep a cliche, you want to avoid the pitfalls of Predictability, thank you. But we want to take things to a fresh place, to a place of innovation, and to have it be that people, oh yeah, it's got that little something to it, doesn't it? Yes, it does. And we hope to bump into that, but you have to do your preparation to, fully optimize your chances of bumping into something special. So I made thanks, Wayne. I made about a dozen of those with Tony in New York, and they were based on records that Bob admired, because Bob liked old rock and roll, early rock and roll records. Maybe a Charlie Patton record or Little Willie John. Just great early American records that were dripping in sound and truth, as if they were just born at that time. And so I paid attention to what, and Bob was right. They were all wonderful records, and I brought those to Tony Mangorian, and we listened to them. We played along with them. We didn't use those actual sounds. We just used our toppings. So we got to play along with Charlie Patton, and then we'd use, if we were lucky enough to get 8 bars of magic, then I would loop that and bring that into the studio for Bob. And as I said a minute ago, the vary speed on the 2-track allowed us to find just the right tempo.
You've mentioned Time Out of Mind quite a few times. For you, it's a very important record.
Well, I felt that Time Out of Mind had the mystery that Bob likes on records. I think we got to a very nice place, and we had an interesting combination of, we had Augie Myers from Texas on the backbeat organ, playing simple triads through a super reverb, little combo organ. He's the best at that. And then we were lucky enough to have Jim Dickinson from Memphis, a brilliant mind, and he was a lot more. He was able to go to the Stardust and to the Cascades and the more mysterious parts of textures, And you look for these little offerings from musicians, and I made it clear to them, to the room, that you don't have to play every riff you've ever worked on. It's okay. Think of yourself as, the way we talked about earlier, you're on a road, and there might be a cactus, and maybe there's a telephone pole, and there's a little shack, and then there's something else. So think of yourself as components in the scenery rather than you can play a riff, but I said no riffs. I don't want to hear any picking, nothing familiar. Just all let Bob dictate the story and let you be a component in the scenery, and not somebody who's trying to draw attention. But we had nice melodies, for example. That's a little melody that was born on my electric mandolin, a little box electric mandolin. And I had a meeting with Bob in the parking lot. I said, well, because he says, well, that's the song. You can do it in any key, any time signature, any way you want. And I said, well, let's revisit that Sad-Eyed Lady of the Lowlands. Not the song, but dun, 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 old 6/8, And so he said, okay, let's try it that way. So decisions like that were made along the way. But we had melodies up our sleeve. I invented that particular one. I think it's called Standing in the Doorway Crying Like a Fool. So that little signature became quite visible ultimately in the mix. And so you can have all the equipment and all the people and all this, but it's nice to have thematic moments to rely on melodically.
Is the picking of the musicians something it sounds like something you take very seriously?
Well, I've worked mostly, a lot with already existing bands. And for Dylan on Time Out of Mind, he was very helpful in choosing the musicians. He decided to bring in Jim Dickinson and Augie Myers. And it was my doing to bring in Brian Blade and Jim Keltner on the drums. Because Bob's bass player, Tony Garnier, is a great bass player, and he's from the South, and so I knew that he would have his thing intact. But I wanted a drummer from the South. It should be said that sometimes huddling, because we talked about keeping people close together, and that's why we don't have people behind glass and all that.
Yeah.
But you can take it a step further. You can have, if it's for example, on Emmy Lou Harris's Wrecking Ball, I was about a distance I am from you right now. I was with Emmy, maybe even a little closer. Yeah. And then Steve Earle over there, and bass player there, and we had 2 kits for Larry Mullen. We had his main kit, and then more of an acoustic kit. So sometimes he'd come in and huddle up with us. And Lucinda Williams came in to join us, and she said, well, am I going to wear headphones? I said, no, Lucinda, it's okay. I can hear you. And she said, well, I've never recorded without headphones. I said, well, let's give it a try. And so we had a very nice self-balancing unit. Because when you're not wearing cans, of course, you're not going to play so loud to drown out the vocal. So there's an ebb and flow that exists. So I like to use the term micro negotiation. So the negotiations and the balances are happening because we want to balance acoustically, and that kind of exchange and balance makes its way to the record, and that can be a very nice thing, because when you're in the studio, then you don't have to do too much, because people got a little quieter when the singing happened and step up for a line, back and forth. So the ebb and flow that's available by proximity and eye communication and just watching somebody's mouth if you're singing harmony, all that stuff is very important. And we captured that nicely on Emmy Lou's Wrecking Ball record.
It's a beautiful record. Beautiful record. I'm a huge Emmy Lou fan anyway, so
yeah,
and that's definitely a highlight.
A nice, beautiful record, yeah. And she was very open-minded. I suggested to her that Jimi Hendrix played country guitar for some of what he did. And so she was she was quite amused by us doing a version of May This Be Love, waterfall, that one. But people are people. You get them close together, you're going to get a certain kind of interplay. And especially if something's not blaringly loud, because a lot of those tracks on Emmy's record were acoustic volume. And then I discovered something nice with, I have some dulcimers up there on the mantle. Emmy had dulcimers at home. I said, well, let's bring those in. And I had my 12-string and my little electric mandolin. And then we brought in and we rented a nice, I think it was a Mason and Hamlin piano upright. It had a little bit of a tack piano sound. And all of those instruments started gelling because they're all multiple strings per note. And so there's a bit of a jangle that happens as part of the sound of that record. And I can remember listening in the cans and thinking, "Oh my goodness, it sounds a little bit like the Crystals from the early '60s," And Emmy's voice soaring over top of this jangling of the multiple strings. And I thought, okay, that's it. That's the sound of Wrecking Ball. And we hope to bump into the sound of a record quite early on. And we're doing that with this work with Micah Nelson, that we've hit on this these heavy tom-tom beats and tambourine. And it's providing a little bit of a Moroccan feeling to some of what we're doing. And so they become dictates, and they become, oh yeah, we're lucky enough to have this come our way, and let's use it as a color or as a template that can make its way to other titles on the record. And then when people listen to that, oh yeah, that's that record. It's got a little bit of that special feeling, and there'll be something about it that belongs to that, and it's not a carbon copy of the last thing that we did or what we did 5 years ago.
I like that, because the albums you make still have uniqueness from song to song. But you're right, they also have snapshots in time. They, as you said earlier, they are records of that moment.
Well, snapshots in time is a nice thing, but and then what Quincy Jones would say, every music has its soul. And as record makers, we have a responsibility to get to that soul of the music that you're making. And then record listeners have a responsibility to seek out the very best. And they have a responsibility to find out which records are the best and have the most soul. Because it's not just soul music in the R&B sense,
I hope you enjoyed that. That was a lot of fun. I think the biggest takeaway for me was Daniel and his equipment. He knows his gear really, really well. And all of those unique records he makes are using the gear to its utmost capabilities. I think that's one of the lessons I took from it. Beyond, of course, the fact that he's gifted, a great communicator, and otherworldly in his production ideas. But I love the idea that he takes the equipment that he's got and knows how to use it to the nth degree of its capabilities. Thanks ever so much for watching. I really appreciate it. So long, farewell, auf Wiedersehen, au revoir, adios. Please leave any comments and questions below. Thanks. Goodbye.